are counting down to default unless the government acts, and quickly. The clock is ticking. August 2nd is the day the U.S. has given as the deadline to raise the debt ceiling, saying after that it just simply will not have the cash to pay its bills. Now, today is the loose deadline that's been reported for lawmakers to reach an agreement on raising that ceiling in order to get a bill passed by that August 2nd deadline. Now, while Washington is still debating the debt but not getting anything done yet, it is already causing plenty of problems without a default. Ratings agencies have the U.S. credit on downgrade watch. States are reportedly having trouble borrowing money already as a result of the deadlock. Average folks aren't sure if they'll get their Social Security checks, and global investors like China, who hold over $1 trillion in U.S. debt, are telling lawmakers to get this done. Now, while they're debating what to cut, Jennifer DePaul, staff writer at Fiscal Times, says the real waste has been 18 months of debt talk, and she joins us. Thank you for being here.
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. This story has been kind of twisting and turning for the last 18 months. We've seen this sort of dysfunctional federal government and really missed opportunity.
Well, what I think is really interesting that you point out that in kind of the short-sightedness of the coverage of this is lost is that the president had a debt commission that for 7 months worked on a deal that they had in November of 2010 that was largely ignored, a $4 trillion deal to cut that from the deficit until now. So why do you think that this is always getting pushed into the last minute?
That, that's a question for the lawmakers, really. But you're right. We've had, at least like a dozen other plans, as well as the debt commission, from think tanks and individual lawmakers, and just now, pushing it up against this deadline that we're seeing sort of a deal emerging.
Why do you think that it always gets pushed up to this point? And because of that, do you think that that means a big deal isn't going to get passed?
I think that given the time frame that we're dealing with, we have 11 days left here. I think that they're still pushing for this big deal, but realistically, to get it scored by the Congressional Budget Office, to get legislation actually drafted, a big deal might not be right here on the table. It might be you put a shorter plan in place, and then with provisions to have the longer plan to reduce the trajectory.
And at the same time, while all this is going on, and maybe a big deal doesn't even get passed, you have global investors like China that are essentially saying, you need to assure us that our investments are safe. Do you think that the U.S., that is their premier job right now, that is what they need to do? Is that more important than getting a big deal done?
I think it's absolutely important to keep the financial markets stable. They are working to raise this debt ceiling to show investors and creditors that they can get this done, that they can reassure that that it is stable here. And I think that is, as you said, the rating agencies have really pointed that out. And I think last week, they're kind of reviving this grand deal. Based on S&P was saying that they're still, even if they do pass the debt ceiling, there's still this 50-50 chance that they'll downgrade the U.S. based on if there's not a credible plan in place to reduce the deficit.
Right, and we have S&P also putting a lot of pressure on politicians. We have them meeting with GOP
they met with them yesterday.
House members to tell them how important this is.
Right.
Do they not understand how important this is? Is this getting derailed because new lawmakers essentially don't really get what's at stake?
I think they do understand. I do think that the House GOP, a lot of those freshmen, they're sort of this wild card, and they came in last November and saying, cutting deficits, cutting the government, that sort of thing. They're trying to maintain on that their pledge. I think they do understand it, but still, at the same time, there's a lot of Republicans who don't want to raise the debt ceiling at all. So, we have to deal with that as well.
Right, of course. And meanwhile, Standard & Poor's continues to put pressure, and they've put out reports and press releases pretty consistently throughout this, said the U.S. has a 50% chance of being downgraded by them. They also, I thought it was interesting, said that financial firms will be the one to get hit hardest if there is a selective default or a default on August 2nd. So is this another case where it's going to end up being the banks whose interests are protected the most, where S&P is really pushing for what benefits the banks most?
I think that's unclear at this point. I think that it's really impossible to know the full impact of what would happen. I do think that there will be a deal by August 2nd. It's just too much of a catastrophic, economic possibilities to not raise the debt ceiling. So I think there will be a deal. And again, I think it's impossible to really know that.
Do you think that there is already being pain felt? Is the U.S. already paying consequences because of this? Because we've seen some states have issues. We've seen Maryland, which is they held off on having issuing bonds today because they said that now they've been told that their credit rating might be affected by this. And California, which has other things going on, they are looking for a bank alternative to issuing bonds. So is already the damage being done?
I think so. I also think consumer confidence is being hit here as well. You see politicians in Washington, back and forth, bickering, not getting a deal done. We're up against a deadline. They're already facing pressures of high gas prices, high food prices. And so, when you have this other factor in place, their 401k could be affected. The housing market could be affected. So there's a lot of factors in this that absolutely, could be part of it.
One of the things that's been brought up is that that Social Security, the government can pay on August 2nd because they can decide what to pay.
Prioritize, right.
They can prioritize. And we've had someone like S&P say that financial firms are who are going to be hit the hardest if there's a selective default. So then should Americans be rest assured that they are going to get their Social Security checks, their pension checks? Do you think that those would really be suspended in a default?
We saw President Obama say last week that he couldn't guarantee about the Social Security cuts. I think, whether the Treasury figures out how those checks will be paid out, that's to be determined, I think.
That's to be determined. We have to wait and see, but thanks for helping us to make sense of this. That was Jennifer DePaul. She's staff writer at the Fiscal Times.